So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Paul Skinner, founder of the Agency of the Future and Marketing Kind, and also of most relevance to this little clip, author of The Purpose Upgrade, Change Your Business to Save the World, Change the World to Save Your Business. I've just been talking to the Positive Nature Network, and Richard, who hosted the event, has kindly sent through a couple of extra questions from the chat that we didn't get around to. So the first question is, how do you co-create a new purpose throughout the organization that everyone buys into? Now, I suppose to do that question justice, I would need to do a whole new talk. It is a powerful question, a really important question. We need to line everyone up if we want to mobilize effectively. And I would say we don't just want to mobilize everybody inside the enterprise around common purpose, but we want to mobilize all our stakeholders around common purpose as well. That's probably the advanced technique. So let me dive into it briefly, though. So first of all, in my talk, I talked a lot about the value of narrative, meaning and purpose in enterprise. And of course, when we think about storytelling in business, we often think about the story that the business tells to its stakeholders. In particular, our minds go towards the tightly controlled marketing messages that a business delivers to its customers. Of course, that's really important. But I think the starting point when thinking about the value of narrative in enterprise is to recognize that there are narratives all around us, not just those narratives. The much bigger picture is that we need to start by understanding the stories that our stakeholders are telling themselves and each other, which is a much more diverse, inclusive and powerful set of narratives, because our stakeholders collectively do much more to change the world than we do. So in the book, there is a dedicated chapter that looks at narratives in this stakeholder sense, that looks at various narrative techniques. Story listening. How can we detect the most important narratives that our stakeholders are telling themselves? Story finding, what insight can we find in those narratives that you don't get from listening alone, but from paying really careful, active attention that can reveal the possibility for greater purpose to be fulfilled? Story tuning. How do we align the narratives of our different stakeholders so that our stakeholders can win together rather than lose apart? I'll give a quick example there. Of course, thinking back to the cancer charity, Macmillan, for a while they really struggled with their messaging because on the one hand, they wanted to tell donors that cancer was an awful thing to confront, and so it was really important to fund it. Great message for donors, but their beneficiaries affected by cancer, perhaps that wasn't the right message for them. And of course, they ultimately squared that circle with the proposition that no one should face cancer alone, which was a message that they could deliver equally happily to all of their stakeholders. Story editing is another technique in that chapter where we can empower our stakeholders to tell themselves better stories. And that is really important because that's how you unlock long-term loyalty or self-perpetuating change, is when our stakeholders have a different story in their own minds about what they want to achieve. And there are effective ways that we can empower that to happen. Storytelling is, of course, always important for a business. And I see that as being about making promises that pull our stakeholders forwards. And then very importantly, story doing. We only earn the trust of our stakeholders if we are predictable to somebody who has heard our story, which means we have to fulfill our promises. There's also a dedicated chapter in the book looking at how we achieve a purpose upgrade across either an individual action within an organization or across an organization as a whole, and really goes step by step through an effective process to bring everyone on board for doing that. I think there was a second question. So I'll go back to Richard's email. What about expanding the perspective from business to private impacts? So I'm going to have to guess a little bit at what was the intentionality behind that question to see if I've interpreted it correctly. I think what it means is, what about not just the business's impacts, but the impacts of the citizens that the business serves? And I think that is an absolute big yes. A business's customers actually do more to change the world than the business. If the customers are not creating more value than the business, there isn't an opportunity. I am not going to buy a Coke at the cinema unless there's a film I want to go and see, and I've got friends that I want to take with me. I think in business, we tend to focus on the value that we deliver to a customer, and we can too often forget that our customer is really at the heart of the picture, and that what they are doing to improve their own life in that particular circumstance, whatever it may be, is always going to be more important than what we are doing for them. And we can best see ourselves as the people who are making it easier, more complete, or perhaps even more magical in some way for them to do the thing that they are attempting to do. And so, of course, when it comes to the fulfillment of purpose, and in this case, for the Positive Nature Network, the fulfillment of positive environmental change, the change that we can enable is always going to be greater than the change that we can deliver. I'm going to give a tiny little example that suddenly pops into my mind from some time ago, just as a thought provocation, which was called traffic light kettles. And so these were kettles that you would use, just an ordinary kettle, as in to make a cup of tea or coffee. But they were connected to the grid, and they had access to the knowledge of when energy usage was such that a new generator was about to need to be turned on, which is the worst time to use extra electricity. And so they had a traffic light system where if the kettle had its red light displaying, then it was best not to make your cup of coffee, but to wait for a little while. When it had a green light displaying, then that meant that it wasn't a bad time to make your cup of coffee. We could give hundreds of examples, but I think it is absolutely correct to say that an enterprise really empowers all of its stakeholders to be change makers. We empower our customers in some way to become something greater or lead a better life than they otherwise would be able to without us, whether that's in a trivial way, a fun way, or a deep and meaningful way. We empower our investors to make a commitment to the future, which can include meaning and purpose, as well as financial return. We enable our partners to co-create a long-term vision with us. We enable our colleagues and employees to become a greater version of themselves, to fulfill their own needs, to progress their own careers, to in some way improve their own life story. So really, we can empower all of our stakeholders to create and deliver a change that is far greater than any enterprise could simply deliver on its own. I hope those are at least starting point answers to the questions. There's a lot more, in fact, with regards to both question in the book, also available as an audiobook. And I will look forward to hopefully engaging with the Positive Nature Network in the future as well. Thank you very much.